professors, we've had this instilled into us that we need to read at that level of detail, because that act of intention is what architecture is. All right, here you are going up the ramp. And you can see the pole of the window on the left. Okay? Yeah. So this is another instance of tension that I was talking about. So you get to the top of this ramp. And what was really staggering to me when I was here was I had no clue that this door was going to be transparent. And the reason that that was so interesting to me is there's the pole on the left wanting to draw you out to the roof garden, but due to the transparency of the door, there's also an equal pull into the salon. And I think that's very interesting, because it's one of these things I'm talking about through the lecture is, without going to the building yourself, you would never have known that door was transparent. Because you can't read that in a plan, and I certainly missed it in all the photographs I looked at. Okay, so here we are on the roof garden. This is notable to me because of the size of this table, which is actually undersized. And so it's a very interesting use of a practical object and rewriting its use by making it an architectural object, not necessarily a functional table. So, for instance, I dragged a chair from inside the salon out to the roof garden to see what would happen when I sat in it, because I'm 6 foot, and that's the height that Corb would design for due to the modular ramp. And the top of my legs were scraping the table. And so it's very interesting, because this space, due to the size of the columns as well on the inside of the salon, seems too big, and in the most odd way. It's like, Julian was making fun of me for this metaphor yesterday, but it's the idea of you had this model in Rhino, and you scaled it 1.15, that's what it was like. Everything was just oddly too large. Okay? Okay, here's another interesting minutia, in that this edge, and you can probably show it better actually in the last photo. Yeah. Okay, so if you look at this edge, it protrudes out. So you can see this again here. And why this is interesting to me, go forward, is that in the original conception sketch, that isn't there. And I mean, I was talking about this with Jordo yesterday, and he suggested that probably this is just structural, and Corbusier made a mistake. And I mean, if anything, that's quite refreshing to hear that the best building of the last 100 years has a mistake in it from supposedly the best architect as well. So that's great. Okay, so the last thing I think I'll talk about here is the solarium. And the reason why this is really incredible is, depending on where you are in the building, this reads it as either volumetric, which it does up here, or planar, which it is here. And it's super cool how he uses the structure to essentially point out the thinness of it. And it seems like this early brutalist idea where he's exposing the structure to do it as well. Okay. Here's a shot of the garage. Jordan's just gonna run through these. So I went to the Maison la Roche as well, and it was totally fantastic, but my camera was dead, so sorry about that. This is Oriane. She was my ride from Paris to Dijon, and it's kind of funny how it happened, because she picked me up in Paris, and about halfway through the ride she was like, oh, well in French of course, she's like, oh Greg, so what are you doing tonight? Where are you staying? Because she could, I'm sure, tell that I had no plan. And I said, oh, I'm probably sleeping in the train station. And she was like, okay, well that's crazy, why don't you just come stay with me, because we're going to my parents' house, and I'm having a couple friends over, and it'll be fun. So of course I say yes. And then I went upstairs to have a shower, and I came down like half an hour later and found a couple more of her friends were there. And before I know it, I was having dinner with her and her 7 like very gorgeous French friends. And so that night I wrote an email to my mom, who was completely terrified about my hitchhiking, and I said, "Okay, Mom, so tonight, just checking in. I'm staying with 7 gorgeous girls in Dijon. I'm all right. Don't worry." Okay, so I made it to the town of Ronchamp, and I showed up in the town, and it's really decimated because there's no industry anymore. When the chapel was built, it was a booming town. Now it's essentially nothing. And so I was looking for a place to stay for the night because, of course, my plan was to just sleep in someone's yard. So I walked through town and kind of went out to the outskirts looking for a farmish type house. And I got to this family's house and was outside their gate, and I was trying to talk to this woman who was the wife of this guy, Christophe, and that's Natalie. And she seemed threatened by my request. So the man of the house came over and I made the same request again. I say, je suis une étudiante en architecture de Canada. C'est possible de rester ici pour la nuit avec mon temps. And he immediately was like, "Oh, of course!" And invited me in, and immediately went into this like ludicrous French hospitality mode, and essentially like swept the rug from under my feet and like planted me down at their dinner table and gave me all this ice water and beer. And he's like, "Why don't you go swimming in the pool with my children while I prepare dinner?" And so he's preparing dinner of Florentine steak, sausage, and shish kebab while I'm swimming with his family. And he's making it on this incredible like stone barbecue that goes vertically, and he's feeding in firewood in. It was just, this yard was so incredible. It was like a photograph. It was unbelievable. So then we sit down and have dinner, and he busts up the 10-year-old Bordeaux wine, and he has all these salads and like shoving meat at me. And then we finish and it's great. And he brings out the tea and cafe, and then the cheese. And then he gives me like the 10-year-old prune digestive as well. And we're talking throughout the entire meal in French, and I'm showing them my route on the map I had. And he's like, "Oh, so are you going to take photos of the chapel tomorrow?" Because everyone in this town had an incredible pride for this chapel. It's all they have. And I say, "No, the batterie est mort," which is, the battery is dead. And he was like, "Ah, merde," which is basically just like shit in French. And you hear it constantly. And he says he has an idea and runs off to his garden shed. And he starts ripping apart, I should say. So the reason I had a dead battery was I foolishly didn't bring this tiny little piece of a converter to use in Europe while I was there. I didn't realize I needed it. And I explained this to him, and he's like, runs off to his garden shed, and immediately starts ripping apart this converter that he's got laying around in this colossal mess of a shed. Grabs my converter, shoves this little piece on the end of it, and like rams it in the wall. He's like, voila! And immediately starts charging. And so that's why we're having the presentation tonight, is because of that guy. So like partway through dinner, these people realized that they were having Canadian, there was a Canadian in the next house. And so, like that guy in Home Improvement, she's like talking to me over the fence. And she convinces me to stay with them the next night, so I was sitting back next door. And what's really cool actually is she was married in the chapel. So she had this like lifetime subscription to Ronchamp magazine, essentially. And she was like showing me all these copies of it. I found all these incredible photos, and I actually put one in that I'll show you. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this. So here's a site drawing for you. Okay, so pay attention to the axis, because I'll be talking that, particularly the horizontal axis there, because I'll be talking about that in a second. Okay, so just like all the buildings I'm talking about, the approach to this is really incredible and very notable. So you start down at the bottom, you work your way up this path. And as you get to the top, I mean, I've wanted to see this building for the last 10 years of my life, and I knew it very well. But I was still blown away by how large it appeared on approach. It was incredible. And so, before I get into that, one of the things I also wanted to show you was, I think what's really notable about this building, and often doesn't get talked about at all, is all the readings of the mass that are possible when you look at it in just 3D. And I find it quite incredible, if you want to go slide, George, how many there are. I mean, you can look at 2 of these and you wouldn't even realize it's the same building. And then you look at the ceiling, the roof, which is in fact planar, but from the bottom looks, or from the ground looks volumetric. Go to the next one. And the next. And then the next one. Like if you just toggle back and forth between these two and how different they are, it's shocking because one of these photos is from the magazine I was talking about, and I'd spent the entire day there, and then I went to her house and was looking at this magazine. I was completely blown away that that is what the roof looks like, because I had no idea. And I think, keep going, George, what's incredible, okay, so when you get to the top, there's this reading of the massing as incredibly huge. And the idea is to embed you with this sense of awe, because you're entering a holy place. And if you look at the way he does it, it's, in plan, he makes the front facade extremely thick and prominent. And if you look at this top space, that's a void space that isn't even part of the building. But he doesn't choose to expose that back in order to emphasize its mass. And then when you go inside, you see that the planar roof, if you give me the slide, which is placed perfectly on axis, creates this really intimate space on the inside. So you go from this incredible sense of awe to this incredible intimacy with the way he manages the plan and the roof line. So you can see this centralized part is all that essentially the central space is, despite on the interior it looking absolutely enormous. And he drops down the ceiling to its lowest point right on axis. So you have this incredible intimate pinching essentially in the space, and it feels very, very intimate. And it's such a wonderful contrast to the exterior. And you can see that slope here. And what's also cool about it is that you read it as volumetric on the outside, and then when you get in, not realizing it's not volumetric, suddenly this gap, which allows the light to come in, you realize that this is in fact planar and very light. So there's this wonderful ambiguity there. Okay, so now I'm gonna take it through the entry steps, because I was really blown away by I'd never experienced something that felt so perfect architecturally. So you come in through that threshold, next one, and immediately on your left there's this water basin. So your focus and your path is immediately either central or to the right. He just completely negates the left movement. Yeah. And then your focus goes to that threshold up there due to the light and how he manages to bring it in above the threshold. It's because the way he mediated the light, it wasn't a typical light source. It was very overwhelming, and it was all you could look at. So you're now drawn towards this threshold. So you take a few more steps. And then out of the corner of your eye, you see the light source coming in from the corner there and above the altar. And so that veers your path again. You start working towards that light source. And then the apertures on your right side along that wall begin to take prominence. Because what's really cool about them is from the entry area, you don't really sense their presence of the light because of the way he angles the apertures. But as you start going through the process of entering the church, they're angled in such a way that you start to feel them and see them far more prominently. And then, so you start walking towards it, and they start taking prominence, and they cause you to stop, almost creating this reverence for the front of the church. And then you sit down in the pews. So George's just going to go through a bunch of these. The equivalent of the garden shed at Ronchamp. You can see how the roof there plays with the roof of the building. Pretty exceptional. Okay. So now I have 5 days to get to my friend's wedding. And I had to go across the country. And what was really great is, so my friend Clarice was getting married to this guy, Jerome. And Jerome didn't know me at all. And he was like, come on, we can't count on this guy. He's not going to be here. He's hitchhiking. That's a ludicrous